It is 6:01, and I'm calling to order our regular Board of Directors meeting for August 13th, 2020. First item up is establishment of the agenda.
We established the agenda as published.
Thank you.
Second.
Any discussion? I have one. Under partial governance process monitoring, so 2E, sorry, it's small, F. I need a bigger screen. The interlocal agreement regarding the fields has not yet been approved by the city. So we're going to need to bump this to the next meeting.
Can I clarify a little bit?
Yes, please.
It's still in the hands of city staff. City and district staff have been working back and forth on it, and we don't have all the pieces with this medium. Sometimes things don't go as quickly as we anticipate. My understanding is city will be looking at both of these interlocals in September. We had hoped to have a first reading of both tonight, but we aren't able to have a first reading of the fields, but we can definitely move it to be on the agenda for the 27th.
So thank you. David, will your motion include amending to place 2F on the August 27th meeting agenda?
Sure. I move as amended
Thank you.
2F to the next meeting.
Any other, we need a second.
Seconded.
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion? I'm going to do roll call votes tonight because of our platform. Maggie Tai.
Aye.
Brian.
Aye.
David.
Aye.
And Tam.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Agenda is established by a vote of 5-0. Next up, we have our superintendent report.
Thank you. We have certainly our reopening plan here. It is very similar to what the board has seen previously, so I'm not going to take the time to go through all the pieces, but based on some feedback, a couple of the slides have been amended slightly. Thank you to Director D'Souza for his suggestion on the opening school goals. We've had a real goal since we closed of communicating regularly, and he pointed out that we didn't have that continued commitment on our MISD opening school goals. So we've added that to that slide. Fred, do you, or Andres, do you want to open the slide deck? We're not going to go through every slide, but we can point out the slides where there's been some slight changes. So go ahead and move to the one that says MISD opening school goals. And you can see we added that at the bottom there. And then on the slide, I think it's slide 20, I can't see the numbers on here, but when Dr. Rendell and I were working on it, we heard confusion on what we have been calling orange learning. And so we wanted to provide some explanation for that. So Fred, would you like to go through these, this slide on orange learning? There's two that talk about what makes orange learning.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think one of the evolutions in our thinking as a school district along the way was, there's been a lot of conversation nationally across our state and region around, what does hybrid really mean? And we've seen models developed, everything from students attending in the morning and afternoon to alternating days. And where we've really landed in our best thinking and what we believe is the best interest of students is to hold off on committing to all of the ins and outs of that, because really what we want to do is remain as flexible as possible. When we were given the Department of Health decision tree, which involved or included the governor's 3 phases that he also provided. And when we put that together with the overall COVID-19 activity level in our area, we really think that it's those 2 variables that really unlock the possibilities and the potential for orange learning, not to lock ourselves into saying we're going to have a model of days and weeks or whatnot, but rather we're going to have a model that responds to the needs of our students. We believe as a school district, we're going to learn a lot in the first few weeks, in the first 6 weeks, however long that kind of introductory period goes into in terms of the fall. We're going to learn a lot about the needs of our students, socially, emotionally, academically, even their need for physical activity. And so using that kind of logic, we think we can think about going from red to yellow in terms of not, as we said, in terms of locked in schedules, but how can we bring students in? And so we're really conceptualizing that orange to be not about a whole school or our whole system moving in and out of something, but rather what do individual students or small groups of students need to be able to make meaningful progress during the academic year. So we see our orange model as our most flexible. We know we're going to need to really be thinking about the health and safety of our students and our staff across all of the different layers, but this one in particular, as we think about those first opportunities to bring students back. So while our district might begin the school year in red, we're already thinking about those personal opportunities for some of our students with the greatest needs, who will be building schedules and appointments and making accommodations to bring some students in. They'll have then an orange schedule that will allow them some face-to-face one-to-one time, while most of the school district is in red. And so a student may have partially part of their day or week is in red and part of it is in orange. When we start then moving to the yellow, that's when we can start bringing whole cohorts, a whole class together, an entire school that's coming back. So that's how we're kind of conceptualizing orange to give ourselves the best opportunity to meet the needs of our students.
So orange allows certainly, red, we've also stated in the slides that red does allow for some students. It describes it as nearly all students are not in the buildings or in remote learning, but we know that even in red, and we discussed this at the last session, that we are already setting up some appointments for students to be coming in, and we'll continue to do that while we're in red. Orange allows us to have certainly still those one-on-ones, but also to start, because the metrics are allowing us and the decision tree and our staff availability and our student learning information allows us to bring in some small groups, as it says here on this slide, potentially some cohorts, but again, being very cautious of the size of those groups as we move through the phases. So we hope that this helps discern the orange a little more clearly. It is something that we want to be very flexible with, and certainly will adjust and adapt as needed. We've kept that in our forward thinking throughout this entire planning process, that we know that we're going to adjust as needed, even with our 3-week decision making that we have discussed in these slides. We know that things could change slower than that and change quicker, but we want to be looking at the information and sharing that with the board in regular meetings as we work through how are things progressing, certainly with the Department of Health decision tree, but also how are things progressing as school begins and we work through that process. So those were kind of the 2 highlights that are slight adjustments to the slide deck. that is our reopening plan. And I can take questions now. We do have 2 other items for the superintendent report, but I thought I would start with that one first.
Superintendent Kloski, I'm going to let you run the questions through. I'll just stay quiet.
I'd just like to say thank you. I think the reopening plan looks really great. And I think Mercer Island, being a medium-sized district, one of our biggest assets is flexibility. We certainly don't have funding that some of the larger districts do, but we certainly do have flexibility, and I appreciate your taking advantage of that.
I just want to say quickly, I appreciate the transparency that the leadership team has given us and the involvement that you've had or welcomed from the community with regards to this plan. To go back to the first vision or the first draft of this plan to now, it's grown tremendously, and it's clear that you've gotten that you've put into place things, feedback that you've gotten from staff, community, and students. So thank you for that. I know this is not a set in stone document, that it will continue to modify and change, but it's I thank you for letting us have this vision into how you create new programs.
Can I just ask, what are the other 2 topics in the superintendent's report?
The second one is Fred's going to give an update on our continued work around Fundamental 7 and our in our value statement of equitable and inclusive learning settings. He's been working with a team of students and staff over the summer, and so we want to update you on that. And the second one is Jamie. Do I see Jamie? Yep, there she is. Jamie is going to give an update on where we are with professional development, because we know that's something that we've had a lot of questions around. And so we want to update on what's already started and what's to come as we prepare for school, particularly in RED, remote learning. So those are the 2 other topics.
Thank you.
Any others before I've now already introduced the next topic, if we're ready to move to it.
Sure, thank you. You know, I thinking towards the end of the school year, there were so many confluences of different regional and national and global storylines related to the pandemic, but I don't think it was lost on anyone, and I think it was in the forefront of our students' thinking, as evidenced by the Black Lives Matter protest and march that they organized, as well as other events in and around that. You know, the murder of George Floyd, but on the, you know, the whole groundswell behind that, with other lives that have also been lost, Breonna Taylor and Freddie Gray, Tanisha Anderson, and others. You know, I think it created this obvious moment. And one of the things that educators started really talking about in our district, along with community members, but also students, was how do we ensure that just because we're at the end of our school year, that we don't come back to a school year where we are carrying that same energy and that same commitment to the values that we put into our district, to the fundamentals that we stand behind, and to our actions. And so what started as just kind of throwing around some ideas to a few teachers quickly grew into over 30 teachers who have been meeting with Megan Isaacson, our new associate principal in the elementary schools, myself, and other administrators. But we've been, we started off really as a group that was talking about how do you make sure that social studies is embedded across all content areas. And that was really the basic premise at the beginning. And that really turned into actually a group that we've now formed, which is called Dynamic Social Justice, which, you know, we won't go into all of it tonight. But that was one element of many that I think the board would be interested in hearing about what's going on. We also had a group of students who came forward and they created a petition. They created a survey and ultimately turned into a series of demands that were both sent to the city council, as well as you as a school board, to Superintendent Koloski, myself, and other leaders. And so we've been engaging with those students as well this summer and trying to bring them into the conversation. And so just last week, or actually it was earlier this week, Scotty Nash from the ADL met with Walter Kelly, Principal Kelly, and Associate Principal Wold, myself, the students, and we had a really robust conversation around how do we garner the passion and interests of students, not just the 4 of them who have been kind of the leaders, but of more students to start doing some peer-to-peer training on how do you support and how do you stand up in terms of those peer development. So we started with a great conversation there. We're envisioning new ways to launch No Place for Hate and make it really even more student directed. I've met with the middle school, Mary Jo and Aaron, and Weston. They certainly have interest in this as well, and we know that the students is where the change is gonna matter most. And so that's been one element of our work this summer. I also want to just highlight some of the professional learning. We had Scotty join our leadership team earlier this week to talk about bias and thinking about implicit bias and various forms of bias, how it shows up, what we need to as leaders be thinking about. And I think that's the beginnings of some conversations. Those of you who were able to join us in June, we brought in Heather Hackman, who we're hoping to partner with even more. We continue to have engagement with her, and we're talking about the road ahead in terms of her work around race, racism, and whiteness, and what that can mean. And then our PSESD work, we continue to have our partnership that we're thinking about for our Superintendent Equity Advisory Committee. But we also joined a transformative action team, really built around what are the anti-racist conditions that you want to put into a school district to make sure that you are thinking about things at the system level. And they range from universal design for learning, which I know President Lurie has been along for the ride on, directly working with Katie Novak and then the team from the district, thinking about social emotional learning, and that social emotional learning done in isolation runs the risk of losing out on its real impact, which is there are many things we can do for social emotional learning that can also help us to promote and teach anti-racist and anti-bias concepts. And then we're also thinking then about how do we expand that partnership with the ESD? So we're thinking about internal and external partners. And then the other component, and this was certainly pushed for by the students and raised, was the curriculum. And what are we doing about the curriculum? And I would say that the dynamic social justice team of teachers, there's a whole group of them who are really fired up about wanting to dig deep into the curriculum and make sure that what we are providing isn't just based on the teacher you get, but all of our teachers. So we're talking about a crosswalk between some of the work out of the Anti-Defamation League is with our second step curriculum. We've talked to EduCurious, which some of you may be aware of as well. They have invited us along with Tahoma School District, and I believe Riverview is going to join as well with a couple other districts from across the state to help rewrite a Washington State history themed curriculum that will really take into the perspectives of Native and Indigenous people as well as others who helped form this state. So we're going to be entering a partnership with them to do some great curriculum writing, as well as take a look at other curriculum in U.S. history that they've already formed. They have a project-based lesson that they're getting ready to launch around Black Lives Matters. And what it's going to do is take a look at the concept of Black Lives Matter and then go back in history and point to about 4 key time periods in history and U.S. history that really led us to this moment. And so we're going to be working with them on that as well. So just wanted to give you and the community some awareness just around things that continue to happen. Yeah, we're preparing for online learning in this crazy start to a new school year, but there's a whole group of administrators, principals, learning support, our superintendent, students, teachers who are continuing to work on these other really important elements of our school district and what we're hoping to accomplish with students. So just wanted to give that brief update. I know it's a little bit disjointed because it's all coming together, but we've got some great ideas for the coming year. Whether or not it's online, in person, we're going to be delivering it.
And I want the board directors to know that this is always, for the time that I've known Fred, this is a real passion for him, especially the social studies curriculum side. We've had lots of conversations about that over the last 3 years. But I also want you to know the only way he's been able to get that done this summer is he duplicated himself, as you can see here on the Zoom tonight. That's the only way Fred can get all this done. So are there any questions for the work that's been going on around Fundamental 7?
Mike, first of all, thank you. I'm really looking forward to watching this as it develops. If students or parents or other community members want to get involved in this, how can they do that?
I think there are several layers there. One would be the Superintendent Equity Advisory. I know we lose members every year, and Kendall helps us to start recruiting new interest there. Each school has been working with different versions of their own action teams within the schools. So there's also school-based opportunities. They can reach out to myself or members of the learning services team. We are always thinking about all of these concepts in terms of not just whether or not it's special education or whether or not it's EL learners, but learning services is about all learners, gen ed. All students are gen ed first, so reaching out to any of us as well, and we can help steer some folks into some directions to help out. We're also thinking about our community and what can our community members also do in their own way, whether or not it's through their faith, through volunteer organizations and whatnot. And that's partly why last year we did that training with city and community members. We don't know if we can do that exact training as of yet. The ESD is going to let us know, but just reaching out, let us know you're interested. We've got places where we can take the passions and put them to work with our students.
Thank you for that and for your report. That's great to hear so much progress is being made, especially in amongst dealing with everything else.
You bet.
So Fred, your update makes me so happy to hear that so much work is going on in this area. I'm glad to hear that you're connecting back with the students who have been doing a lot of work to raise the concerns that they're experiencing in the community and society. And I'm glad that we're making it even bigger, right? Giving this opportunity to really have an impact, especially during this time of COVID. I think our students really need a purpose, right? A way to see how they can really apply their concerns to their community. So I think that to hear all the different plans that you have going on is really exciting. So my question is, there's a lot of students who are doing a lot of the spearheading legwork on this, and it's a lot of, not only a lot of work, but a lot of emotional labor, right? What can we do to support them, right, in the work that they're doing? Do we support them through extra credits? Does it count to their service learning? As we're making this bigger and making it something that everybody wants to join, what ways can we explore to make sure that students are really being rewarded for their innovation and commitment to serve our community.
Principal Kelly, I know you've been meeting with some of the students as well, so I don't want to withhold your voice. And I know you've been thinking about the high school. I mean, just to kick it over to you, I mean, my thought is part of it is they just want to be part of the change. And some of them, their buckets are filled simply by being invited to the table and doing some of the hard work. What we also know is some are motivated by community service hours because it looks good on a resume or whatnot. And so there is some of that, but I think there's that tension between, are they doing it because they want to see the real change, or are they doing it because it gives them something? But I think I see where you're coming from, Director Din, in terms of, what is that fine line? And it's probably talking to the students, but Principal Kelly, what are your thoughts?
First, I appreciate Fred's work and leadership along with Nick and many others leading into this. Secondly, the perspective of student voice and promoting student activism along a good cause is a primary mission that we have as educators. One of the things, and I'll get to it, you're speaking specifically, I think, Fred, is what's the extrinsic reward? We have students that are intrinsically motivated to lead this work. We first want to exploit that in the best possible way. We want to make sure that we amplify that voice. We want to make sure that we're providing the structure, support, and organizational skill that young adults need and students need to move that forward. So that's priority one. And I'm going to also beg a little bit of ignorance on this, in that I don't know all the extrinsic motivating structures for the high school yet. Yet I will tell you that aligning that with community service rewards, recognitions, anything we can do along those lines, Dr. Den, would fully align with my philosophy personally, and I believe our school as a whole. So we're going to work on that. I promise you that I'll follow up with that. The second component would be what we're doing in addition to what Fred was just sharing. We're having some of the students that led this movement speak to our faculty on our first morning back as a part of what we're doing with school climate, culture, and values. And they're going to push just the why and reiterate the passion that they have, so that when we keep working with teachers on professional development, we take every opportunity we can to roll that into the curriculum. And the other part I'm really excited about, I'm sorry to take so much airtime, but this is just such a fabulous piece of work through COVID and well beyond COVID, hopefully. It is that we'll be working with multiple student leadership groups to see how they want to impact this topic, because I believe that the leadership will be intrinsically motivated. And I agree with you. Providing the extrinsic motivation to provide that support group around them for kids will need to follow as well. So I'm going to beg ignorance on one. I promise you that that's in line. And then we are doing everything we can to develop the intrinsically motivated student's voice at this time. And I appreciate
you, Principal Kelly. It's not about telling you what we need to do, but just recognizing as an institution, how do we really recognize and support from an institutional perspective and embedded it in there. And that's what I mean by appreciating and rewarding. It doesn't have to be, it could be in many whatever way that you think is best, but we just need to know how do we as an institution recognize the wonderful work that they're doing.
Thank you. And we're working with our student leadership team also on a retreat coming back in the next couple of weeks. We're trying to figure out how we do that, but that's going to be one of the topics we engage in, is what are things that we could do to move it forward. So I really respect and appreciate the point. Thank you.
So if there's no other questions, Principal Kelly led us right into the next topic, which is what is the professional development that we are engaging in right now and moving forward as we get ready to start school. So Jamie, are you ready?
Absolutely. Ann Reeves is actually going to share a screen with everybody in just a moment. So last spring, we've talked about kind of being in triage mode and really having to flip a switch and just dig in and go. And so our instructional coaches shifted how they supported our teachers and really worked to support alongside in training the tech tools and just trying to help keep people afloat. And so they were not able to coach in a coaching cycle. We've adopted Jim Knight's coaching cycle. And we went away from that for a little while just to make sure that we were completing the school year and providing all hands on deck. Over the course of the summer, in planning for this school year, all of our instructional coaches, so this includes our special education coaches, our elementary coaches, middle school, high school, tech coaches, all of the above, have really been working to make sure that we provide professional learning for our staff, as we know that we're now returning in red, to make sure that we are consistent, hearing that concern from students and parents, that we're predictable, so that there is consistency and predictability when engaging with Zoom, with the learning management systems, and then really trying to provide some new learning opportunities for staff as they begin to think about the concerns that we've heard about, how do I build an online community in a remote setting? How do I get that sense of, back to school excitement and yet never be able to touch and feel and see the classrooms? So what they have worked on literally all summer, they've been collaborating, they've been reaching out to teacher partners throughout the district to create asynchronous learning opportunities that staff were able to begin accessing on the 10th. So this was launched on the 10th. And as you can see, I know I've said it in a couple of different meetings and settings, but we really have 2 required courses for all certificated staff. And that is to make sure that we've got consistent learning management implementation and consistent Zoom implementation. And so every certificated staff is engaging in those 2 learnings for their respective grade levels. And then really trying to get to the instructional strategies. We've narrowed the window. What we used to have as a technology integration day would offer 30 or 40 different opportunities for teachers to select and choose from a variety of tools and workshops. And we've really narrowed it down with the work of our instructional coaches to hone in on the things that we feel are going to have the most return on investment from time from our staff as they engage in professional learning to kick off this school year. So Andreeves, if you scroll down, you can see the options and the different offerings that are currently available to our staff. And then if you keep going, we also have a number of staff members who, outside of this, through support with our Learning Forward professional development team, all the way down, Andreeves, keep going, have identified, keep going. I'm sorry, I'm not driving, like all the way down to the orange part, Andreeves. There we go. With the input of the professional Learning Forward team, we have a number of other educators who are now putting together shorter videos from the requireds that are dealing with things like differentiation and UDL and establishing relationships, project-based learning in an online environment and what that looks like. And so this list grows every single day as we get more videos in, and the professional learning team met again today. And we did a touch base to see what was the initial feedback. The initial feedback has been that it's great and that staff are really excited that we are more than 2 weeks earlier than we've ever provided professional development to allow them time to view, digest, plan, ask questions. And then we're getting feedback about what else needs to happen. And so this continuous cycle that we haven't been able to have in the past because we have been in person and we've been planning for a singular day. We're really excited with this new format and being able to give teachers tools and resources as early as we possibly can. It's not a requirement, but it opens that door for those people who are chomping at the bit to get going in preparation. So I'm happy to take questions, but just wanted to show you that this is a ton of work and a huge lift on the part of all of our instructional coaches. And I think it is going to prove fruitful for consistency and predictability for students and parents.
Any questions on the professional development?
I'd just like to say thank you once again for this work. We recognize it is so different teaching face-to-face and teaching online. And we appreciate, we've heard a lot of concerns from our constituency and parents as to how do we make sure students are engaged and students are actually learning the material. And this is a wealth of information that teachers have access to. And it sounds like they have access to it throughout the year. So as they encounter problems, they can come back and review and find solutions they need as well. So thank you very much. This is a very comprehensive program to make sure that online learning is working, is great, is meeting the needs of our students. So thank you.
One of the things I didn't share was really the technical piece. So we actually have a whole nother spreadsheet of professional learning opportunities for teachers to help with some of those very technical pieces, like how do I use this given tool? And there are a series of tutorials and help documents that I didn't feel like was necessary to share here, but it's another resource. And we're also creating one for parents that's a companion document. And so we've heard from families saying, you know, I need to know exactly where to go to get help or help access something, or what am I looking at? How do I support my student here? So our coaches are also putting together a companion document for families to be able to have one place. It's super cute visually. And so I think it will be accessible and easy to understand for families and students who need that support too. So that is coming.
I just wanted to say also thank you, that I really appreciate that this whole professional learning program and the plan as a whole really look like they're doing more than just kind of plugging the holes that we all found as you know, kids and parents kind of went through that emergency crash course in online schooling this spring. I feel like you're moving beyond that. Like, yes, you're plugging the holes that were identified, but you're also moving beyond and looking positively and proactively at, you know, how do you build community? How do you try and give kids back some of what they're missing by not being in a physical building with their classmates? So I really appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes.
Jamie, you answered my question before I could ask it. And I was going to ask in terms of if any of those resources would be helpful for parents, as we are unfortunately the conduit for assisting especially our youngest learners this year, and probably don't have as much familiarity with Seesaw. So thank you for that. When can parents expect to see those resources so that they can maybe get a jump start on before school actually starts?
Oh, so I'm gonna take a stab at it. We're simultaneously planning for the remaining professional development that we have for staff that will be synchronous, and we are also creating this document for parents. So I'm going to provide a little buffer and say in the next 2 weeks. So it will definitely be before school starts, but I don't want to commit to next week, knowing that we are gearing up for that big push of professional learning right before the start of school. And that is a great bridge to Weston Lucas. He is going to show you, just so you can see, so I showed you kind of general district-wide, what we're doing, what the PD looks like. And then I asked Weston just to share briefly, and Andrew is going to show his screen, what the middle school is doing. So, you know, we've got the district-wide professional learning, and then each building also is responsible for professional learning leading up to the start of the school. And the middle school really took a great lead and provided this format and structure to other schools to be able to use. So he's going to share what they've done so you can see an idea, get a glimpse of what's happening at the school level as well.
Thank you, Andrews, and thank you, Jamie. A big thank you to Aaron and Mary Jo, who did the heavy lifting on this work. But the team, we really built off of the idea that came out of Jamie's work and the learning services team around asynchronous opportunities. You know, our teachers, there was a sense of urgency around some of the learning to prepare for the needs of kids as we're welcoming them in the RED model. And we knew that the time that's been dedicated to buildings, which is the 28th of August and September 1st, that's very close to the start of school, and that there were some things that our teachers wanted to get a start on as soon as they could. And so we built some asynchronous opportunities. Some of those are the same opportunities that are available for the tech day. So where on the technology day, teachers are choosing 2 of 3 or 4 workshops, we are asking them to go back and watch the remaining workshops that they didn't choose. Essentially, we took some of the time that's dedicated for professional learning and made that asynchronous so that teachers have that choice and opportunity. And so you can see the document we've created here is kind of a step-by-step task list that we're asking for teachers. Things like creating warm welcomes for students and for families and introducing themselves. They're going to be creating videos. If you could continue scrolling, Andrews. In addition, there's some nuts and bolts learning that's happening. So we as a building have created a common learning template that all students will see when assignments are rolled out their week in advance, so that it's easy for students and for parents who are supporting to find what they need to for assignments and for lessons. And then some of the work is in preparation for our time together. We did reserve some time together on those learning days. Just before school starts, one of them will be dedicated to our work on race and equity. And so some of the choices here are in preparation. Our instructional coaches have created an incredible choice board of opportunities for reading and learning in the area of race and equity, and following that universal design for learning model where it's really choice-based. And if you could continue scrolling, thanks, Andrews. And then again, back to some nuts and bolts pieces. So there really are a variety of activities, but they're all asynchronous so that teachers have time and choice to do this on their own and be prepared for our synchronous time together on the 28th and 1st.
Awesome. Thank you, Weston. Oh, Brian, sorry, go for questions before we move on to something else.
No, just a quick question. So one of the legislative positions that the Ledge Committee put together this year was a position on professional development around remote learning. And one of the issues for that, number one, I would love to have an overview, a simple overview of the work that's happening at MISD that I can share, especially with our East Side partners, of the work that we're doing. I would love to be able to brag on your behalf. And also, what is the funding mechanism for this? Because funding for these programs is challenging, especially right now. So how are you able to fund these extra pieces? Is there a lot of free training? How does that work?
Fred, since this is a learning services piece.
Ooh, that is that's a whole board meeting maybe. It's really about what we call braiding funding, and that is there isn't one funding source that comes in. I'm going to start right with two elements of funding that come right from this community. One is the support of the levy and the capital and tech levy. That technology levy really allows us to leverage the use of our instructional technology coaches just as the tip of the iceberg, and really being able to capitalize on those additional positions in our school district to really provide that backbone of support on the technology side. I would say then also the Schools Foundation has been a tremendous support for us and able to enhance our professional learning. The Title II budget, which is the federal allocation for professional development, has shrunk below 100,000 now that we receive as a whole district. And then we also do proportionate share with our local private schools. And so there becomes kind of a per pupil count, comes out to be about $10 per student. And that's how we allocate that. And so because those have been diminishing, we've really been buoyed up by our foundation and our levy. But we also are looking for certainly free opportunities that are provided. Tomorrow there's one by Katie Novak on UDL, for instance. But there's always a cost, or there's oftentimes a cost to any of the trainings that aren't just the trainings themselves, but are pay our teachers and our staff to attend some of these on their own time. We have done some nice work, I think, with MIEA to add on our MAPLE hours, the mutually agreeable professional learning. Those have been opportunities to extend and enhance that opportunity. We've been able to use some other creative mechanisms, but really it's homegrown, to be honest, Director Janini Upton. It'd be great to have more, but a lot of it comes from right here on Mercer Island.
And not just our time levy, but also our enrichment levy as well has some of the ways that we're able to provide professional learning for all staff. Did that answer your question?
So there's one more piece that I would be remiss if I did not share. And so we talked a little bit about the professional learning for staff and what we're doing for consistency with learning management systems, instructional strategies to kick off the year, looking at some UDL and equity training that's being provided. But we also have this huge component of SEL, social emotional learning, as we return to the school. And so we do have a Learning Forward team that has been working on that as well. And that team is really working on putting together some resources for staff and parents. And I don't know, Beth, if you want to add anything to that, but that group is working in providing some new learning and opportunities for support for families and for staff.
Yeah, I can just lean into that. We, just to branch off and be a little bit more specific, we are looking at building resource pages for families as it relates to academic support, as it relates to social emotional support, really leaning into all the different ways to be able to provide that information, whether it's something that a PDF, or if it's a video, or we even were tossing around a podcast. So we are really thinking about how we can reach out to families as we enter into the virtual learning and continue in the pandemic. And yeah, that's just a little bit about it, but we're really excited about building that and launching that.
And there you have Superintendent Report. Lots in it. Apologize for taking so much time, but we felt we had a lot to bring to you for all the work that's been occurring over the summer as we prepare for reopening. And the Superintendent Report will be consistently bringing these updates to you as we navigate through this new way of learning and how we're supporting staff and our students and our families in this reopening plan. President Lurie, back to you.
Thank you, just unmuting. Thank you for that valuable information. I'm excited to learn more as we move through our school year. Next, we are on to a partial governance process monitoring, Board Policy 1800, OE10 instructional program, school reopening planning, and specifically resolution number 688. Superintendent Klosky, are you going to
I can just give you a little bit on this. The resolution is the resolution that was presented to the board back at the study session at that time to give you a chance to review it. And just as a reference document, we've included the template. The template will be filled in. It's an online template, so we've just provided you what the questions are that OSPI is asking. I think it's important to note that the template was designed really more along the lines of reopening with students in our buildings, but of course, as we know, every district in King County, and I think I heard today a number of, there's maybe 2 in the state that aren't opening in a remote learning environment, but pretty much everyone is. And so the template was built before that. We are still going to be completing it and filling it in and getting that off before our deadline, which is next Tuesday. And then the resolution is there for your action and approval as well to make sure that that is all completed.
Okay. I'm looking for a motion.
I move that we adopt resolution number 688 as presented.
Second.
Any discussion?
I would like discussion.
Tam?
So I know that we talk a lot about how this is, you know, we have a really good start, right? But recognizing that we're evolving and making change as necessary as things, challenges rise in front of us. And then I know that we have also talked about our commitment to work alongside with the community and the parents. And so I wonder whether it's pertinent in this resolution or whether it would be codified somewhere on how do we make sure that there is more of a feedback loop, right, as we're doing this. I know that we have the Superintendent Future School Advisory that's in place already, but then, for this resolution, I wonder if in that we're now therefore be it resolved, the Board of Directors hereby, is it appropriate for us to add in, how do we codify maybe the future school advisory board to help us to maintain this feedback loop of review and to see if the processes as we're developing it are working for parents. So just wondering where it would fit in this resolution or somewhere else.
Any other questions or comments?
To address Tam's concern, I believe there's a whereas where Governor Inslee issued proclamation 20-09-2, allowing a phased reopening of K-12 schools subject to guidance from Office of Superintendent. I believe we've talked about the phased reopening, and they're not specific about the phases, and they're not specific about what the reopening looks like. So that's at the, I presume that's at the discretion of local school districts at that point. Would that be correct, Superintendent? So I see a nod.
Just a reminder, there are some pieces. So I know it was shared at one of the past meetings last week that if a local school board did determine that they were not going to comply with the decision tree, so to speak, that the governor and the Department of Health have produced and is shared with all school districts, and it's part of our opening plan as well. If you decided not to follow that, that would be definitely going out on your own limb, so to speak, and your risk management, if you had any incidents that came out of that, your risk management would not cover your liability on that. So you do have those parameters of which we need to be staying in and watching that decision tree.
Maggie Tai?
Yeah, I kind of feel like, I think I understand where Tam is coming from, but I feel like it's covered by by the line before the now therefore. So 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph from the bottom where it says, whereas the board will have the opportunity to discuss future changes of a fully remote program based on evolving conditions throughout the school year. I kind of feel like that covers that issue, because if we feel like we're getting feedback from parents, we can share that with the board, we can share that with the superintendent. And if we feel like, there's more input that's needed from the community, that's something that kind of goes back and forth, right? So I feel like that point is covered.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that there's somewhere that we're very clear that there is this feedback loop, and as we're all making these, as we're evolving, right, that we're being really flexible and nimble to meet the changing needs of maybe the community or the families. And so if you feel that in that area, that if we're getting in our monthly board meetings and we're getting feedback enough, and we're hearing parents' concern, if that the board thinks that's enough, then I'm fine with it. But I just want to make sure that we highlight that.
Thank you.
I would just like to point out that it is in your Board Policy 1800 OE9, which is Superintendent Communication and Support to the Board. And that's on every board meeting, twice a month. And so just as we did tonight, we will be continually with staff updating the board on where we are as in consideration of what the decision tree, staff availability, how things are going. We will be doing that at each of our regular board meetings as part of that OE9.
Any other questions or comments? Are we ready to vote? I'm going to do a roll call vote. Just want to make sure that I say that we're voting on the right thing. The motion was to approve resolution number 688, the instructional program school reopening planning. I vote in favor. Maggie Tai? That's a yes. And
Aye.
you can show me. I'll watch the screen. That's fine. Either way. Brian? Is a yes vote. David is a yes vote. And Tam?
Aye.
Is a yes vote. So the board approves resolution number 688 by a vote of 5-0. Next up, we have board policy 1800 OE6 budgeting financial planning quarterly update of 2019-20 budget.
Hey, before we move on, can I just ask one thing? Where again can our community find this resolution?
Oh, you asked that hard question because we did just find a space for this in our board docs under library, under board governance. So if you click on library and you go to strategic goals, you will see all the board governance policies, and then you will see a tab for fundamentals, a tab for the OEs, and a tab for board resolutions, which are organized by the resolution number. But when you click on it, thank you, Andrews, when you click on it, it will give you the date and everything. And they're not all there yet, but we are working on the backlog of other resolutions to have them located in that space as well. So if you're looking for it, that's the place to find it.
Thank you for creating that gallery.
And I know that was, yes. Thank you, Kendall, for that. And I know that was a setup question, and of course, it's also in board docs under tonight's agenda as well, but that'll be harder to find as time goes by. But so thank you. So if someone's looking for it right away, that's probably easier. Okay, so moving on to 2B and Superintendent Kolosky.
So Ty's going to give you a quarterly update. Believe it or not, we are still finishing out our budget for 2019-2020. As much as we're talking about the new school year, the other one is still there for us to look at and reflect on, particularly through June. So Ty.
All right. Andreas, if you wouldn't mind loading up the budget report. Awesome. All right. So we are we've closed out the month of June 30th, which is, there's 2 more months left in the fiscal year. July and August, we just barely received the July bank statements on Tuesday. So, well, I wish we could have July up for you. It's just not possible to get it done in time for the board. But if we could scroll down and get to the general fund financial statement. Oh, keep going. Too far. Keep going. Right there. All right. Nope. The actual numbers. There we go. All right. So as we were closing out the month of June, we have revenues of $53,600,000 and change, which is about 77% of the budgeted amount of revenues. So source 2000 local support non-tax, that's our donations, our program fees, lunch revenues, facility use rental revenues. That's taken a substantial hit this year with lunch program shut down, refunding school courses, refunding some athletic fees, which touched both the general fund and the ASB fund. We are not likely to see as much of the 2000 group revenue sources coming in. The state general purpose, we are likely to receive the vast majority of that. and then about 98% special purpose as well. Federal special purpose will be getting a large chunk of that in August. So what we're really looking at is there's a timing difference in the revenues. We'll be getting our safety net allocation, which is about 470,000. Sue-Ann's probably shaking her head at me right now, but I can't see the specific numbers. I don't know can't quite remember off the top of my head. We have the remainder of the technology levy to transfer from the capital projects fund and reimburse the general fund. And we have a significant chunk of our federal grant revenue, which will be billed and received in August. So we are going to be receiving more revenues as we move forward. And looking at expenditures, we, at the end of June, hit 53.7 million, or 55.37 million, which is about a $1.7 million spending beyond collected revenues at this point. So we had planned to spend down fund balance, and we are still looking at spending down fund balance. Current projections for general fund revenues for the looking at the collection trends and historical trends, projected revenues for ending the 19-20 school year will be 65.4 million. Projected expenses using the same historical trends and patterns will be 66.4 million. So we're looking at a spending deficit of about $1.03 million. So we will have spent down the fund balance by about $1 million. If we can scroll down further, let's go to the capital projects fund, touch on that briefly. Cash flow trends are following. Enrollment is consistent at this point for 1920. Capital projects, we are on track for completing the IMS roof and the IMS track and field on time and on budget. We had placed a $75,000 contingency for the roofing materials for plywood under the shingles to replace some of the less stable boards. We've used a good chunk of that, but we should still be on target, and they are soon to finish that project. The field has required a bit extra material, gravel underneath the carpet layer to help smooth the field out so it's a nice level playing field. But that is also within the contingency of the project and is not a significant increase. Mary Waite Pool is also progressing nicely, on time, on budget as well. We were able to secure about another $86,000 of grant money to apply to the pool and energy rebates. So that's a bonus for the capital projects team that they were able to secure that for us. Apparently today was a good day to watch that project because they were bringing in the air handlers for the new air system, which is the size of a small portable building on our campus. So watching that being crane lifted, yeah, huge crane lifting it over the pool. And as I was talking with Tony Kuhn today, I was like, please don't drop it on the pool. You just can't deal with that in 2020. All right, so capital projects. What's that?
I said they didn't. I've been here. I've been watching.
I know. He was. By the time I talked to him, they were done moving in. So it was. We're in a good place. Progress is being made on the pool, and we should be done on time. As we move on to the next. To the next fund, which I believe is debt service. Transportation vehicles. At this point, we have no activity outside of transportation vehicles. We have purchased buses for the next fiscal year, and they will be paid in the next fiscal year. But for the remainder of 1920, there is no activity in the transportation vehicle fund. So if we can move on to the debt service. Debt service
Can I ask a quick question about that? So as our buses aren't being used to the degree that they normally are, I know a lot of us have gotten breaks from our automobile insurance reductions because of that. Are we seeing anything like that from our insurers?
No, because we still are using our buses, have been using buses in limited capacities. And it's
Oh, I'm just suggesting, like,
yeah. I mean, I can
% off through my policy because of the lack of miles. Just wondering if there's something else.
I haven't heard.
Great question, and we can ask.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll follow up.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Debt service, as mentioned before, we were able to make the bond repayment and interest payment in June without any problems. We've secured about 97.6% of our levy funding for that. We did have some concern earlier in the year about collections, but we were able to collect sufficiently to maintain a healthy reserve to make those payments of $7 million. So we keep scrolling to ASB. ASB took a bit of a revenue hit in terms of refunding the athletic fees and refunding some of the course fees and programmatic club fees, as well as gate receipts and other student-related activities. So revenue has actually decreased slightly over the year, but expenditures have still maintained consistently as we've paid off some of the stipends and some of the other activities in the spring that we're able to do remotely. So we anticipate the general fund being stable, not general fund, the SB fund being stable through the rest of the year.
Ask a quick question about
absolutely.
that. Are we collecting ASB fees this fall or not right now?
I believe the plan is to continue to collect ASB fees. Those ASB fees fund a lot of club stipends and activity stipends, some of which can still be done remotely. They also help pay for some activities and stipends that we'll be able to continue in this remote setting. So along with the hope that as we transition into Orange, we can start bringing students back into small groups and club settings, and hopefully later in the year we'll be able to transition into yellow and green, knock on wood, and be able to start having some of those clubs and maybe even some club competitions. So we don't really want to negatively impact the ASB fund in terms of ASB card fees.
Yep.
Especially since we're not going to be seeing gate receipts in the next few months.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So any other questions on the budget status report for June? All right. If we could close this file and then go to the next one. It's the general fund ending fund balance projection. So using the budget analysis tools that we have that track expenditures and patterns of expenditures over the past several years, through June, we have a pretty good source of data now to really project the June ending fund balance. There was some slight concern about revenue sources earlier in the year, and I've got to move a couple windows so I can see the, there we go. So we were projecting $6.83 million ending fund balance, which is about a 9.1%. We measure that percentage as the dollars ending fund divided by the expenditures, the budgeted expenditures. So that's 9.1%, which is a little bit higher than we had thought a couple months ago as we were going in into these projections. But the timing of some of the revenues and collections kind of helped smooth it and bring it up just slightly. So as I mentioned, we're looking at about a $1 million fund balance reduction from last year to the end of 1920, or 1819 to the end of 1920. Any questions on the projected fund balance?
Do we expect to be able to maintain this fund balance as we think about the progression through the school year under these COVID conditions?
That's
So Director D'Souza, you are asking a question that comes with the next item on the agenda, which is the budget development for next year. So if you would like to hold on to that, I think
sounds fine. Thank you.
What a perfect segue. So Andrews, if you could close down this and then bring up the guide to the budget.
I just want, before, that's a perfect segue. I just want to make sure that no other directors have questions with regards to the quarterly update. And I know we're going to have more questions now. So, all right, thank you. Donna, you're on mute.
Sorry. Just before we move into this item, just a reminder that this is our first reading of the budget. At our August 27th meeting will be the second, which will be the board adoption of the budget. That's when we also, by law, must have a specific public hearing on the budget. So this, I know we've talked a lot about it as we've gone through the quarterly pieces. So this is kind of the first look and the first reading. So discussion time for budget planning. And from there, I will turn it over to Ty. Which item did you want Andreas to put up first?
The guide to the budget. All right. So this is the guide to the budget. This is our summation of our budget plan, as well as some supporting information and some discussion. We prepare this every year as a way of, and I got the date wrong, I apologize, of providing a summation of our thoughts and intentions about the plan, as well as what the plan looks like. So if we could scroll through the introductory section, we can touch briefly on the introductory pages. The introduction, the guide goes through, the introduction just lays out what the intention of the budget is, what our guiding policy is. The policy is guided by 1800 Operational Expectation 6, Budget Financial Planning, which sets out a lengthy list of things that I and Superintendent Klosky need to consider as we're framing the plan and how and what we're going to be including.
Just to note, this is a first reading. The date was wrong on the cover, and here none of us caught Board Policy 2020 is incorrect. That should be Board Policy 0001.
It's another good catch. All right, and if we scroll down, The guide also goes through what is a budget, and it introduces the concept of school district budgeting. How are the different funds separated, and what are the purposes and intentions of the funds, as well as the legal restrictions that are applied to them. The general fund is our general operations and supports the core education mission. Transportation vehicle fund is the sole purpose, and the only thing that we can do with that is the purchase of buses. Capital projects fund is related to capital planning, facilities maintenance, construction, technology, adoptions and installations, as well as the district technology plan and training for technology. Debt service fund is solely for the repayment of our bonds, and the associated student body fund is solely to support student activities, and it is governed by the ASB bodies. So they're the ones that approve expenditures within the ASB activities. And as we scroll down, the next section talks about what our funding sources are, our state funding, the prototypical model and basic ed, federal funding grants such as special education, Title I, Title II, child nutrition. We don't get a whole lot of federal funding, but it is important. Our local levies are an important part of our funding ecology, and provides a lot of our enrichment and helps support our staffing model, as well as our staff costs. We are not apportioned the amount that we are able to pay our staff, and we are able to pay our staff because of the levy. So as we move on, those are funding sources. Other funding sources are local collections, the non-tax. So those are the lunch, that's the lunch money, facility rentals, donations from boosters, PTAs, and the foundation, community grants, and then other grants, agencies, and funds. So for example, the money that the city of Mercer Island provides to maintain the operations of the pool, that falls under other grants and agencies. Funding uses, goes just scrolling quickly through that. It talks about how we divide expenditures between basic education services, support services, special education, food. Each of those comes in its own specific program, which is divided up into the activities which support the program, and then how we spend money on the objects within those activities. So as we move further on and we get to the general fund, there's some things that we need to consider as we talk about the general fund. There's a lot of concern, and this is a summary of the 5 funds that we operate with: the general, transportation, capital projects, debt, and ASB, and the summation of the budget plans. With their various revenue collections, beginning fund balances, and ending fund balances and expenditures. And as we move into and we'll go through each of these funds, some more briefly than the general fund. The general fund is going to have a rather it's going to be an important topic of conversation because that's our largest fund. And it's also how we support the mission of the district. So if we could scroll on to the general fund. Too far. All right, thank you. So we've had a lot of concerns over the general fund, new state mandates, funding changes, changes to the prototypical model, changes to the levy model, the introduction of SEB. Currently, SEB has cost the district about $1 million. It's about $100,000 a month additional cost over the previous health insurance model. So ongoing, we're looking at about a $1.2 million cost of the SEB program. But that's incorporated in the budget plan, but that's something that's a consideration that we have to keep being aware of and thinking about as we look at our staffing model and the cost of staff. COVID has placed a large strain on everyone's budgets. Every government agency is looking at how do they support their core mission and environment we're in. And one of the things that we've been looking at as we plan the budget for 20-21 is the high level of uncertainty that we're facing around some of our funding streams. There's a level of uncertainty around PTA collections, about the foundation collections. There's significant uncertainty about transportation revenue. We just got a letter from OSPI today talking about transportation revenues and the complexities that will be arising from that. That model specifically is funded through ridership counts. So we will be funded September through January based off the spring rider counts. However, January is based off of the fall winter counts. And if we are not transporting students, that input into the budget is zero. And so there's going to be a steep cliff come January from transportation funding. So we're looking at how do we sustain transportation and what does that look like? How does that work? It's a conversation that every district in the state is having right now. This is not unique to Mercer Island. Other things to consider, that uncertainty. The state is facing a $9 billion revenue shortfall in the next biennium. What does that mean to future school funding? We don't know. There's a lot of different talk about the legislature modifying funding formulas for transportation. They could, we just don't know. A lot of uncertainty right now. In terms of expenditures, as we're looking at the budget, there have been significant changes in how we have been spending funds over the spring and summer. One of the things that we had to consider is the high increase in purchasing of health and safety supplies. So thermometers, masks, gloves, pallets of plexiglass sheets that we can use to build dividers for staff desks and reception desks and workspace areas to help box in and contain and provide separation for safety sakes. We have been working with vendors to purchase supplies and as well as new costs for online education, new programs, new services, new technology options and training, as well as staff costs over the summer. Learning Forward teams have put in a tremendous amount of work trying to lift a huge load in order to get us where we are today. So that also incurred additional costs. So as we're looking forward into 20-21, there's a lot of uncertainty about what is this model what are we going to be running into? And so we built the budget plan for 20-21 with flexibility. We have budget capacity that we put into the budget. It is less than previous years. We've been working hard to bring down the gap of what we've been planning, because we do have some things that we put into the budget that we don't quite know if it's going to be fully utilized or not. So things that are in the contract, so vacation cash outs, sick leave cash outs, technology training hours, staff extra hours, there's mentorship stipends. There are things that our contract requires that we put into the budget with a plan that worst case scenario, everyone uses it, we'll be okay. So we've been trying to make sure that our budget plan reflects the uncertainty that we're facing, and that we have capacity to be agile enough to adopt or position ourselves in ways that we can be successful, but also meet those demands of staff need and student need as well. So when we're looking at the general fund plan, if we scroll on to the next page where we actually talk about the general fund, we're planning on starting the year with the fund balance, as I said, of 6.89 or 6.8 million. We're planning on revenues of 68 million. We reduced our revenue projections from earlier in the year with recognition that most likely we will not see previous levels of lunch money, previous levels of donations, grants, gifts to the district. So there have been some reductions in the revenue. We've also made some reductions in the planned expenditures. As I mentioned, we're not going to be running the buses for most likely the first half of the year. The majority of the buses, we will be transporting special ed students for services when able to, but not the full fleet. So we've reduced the transportation expenditures some. We've also, because we will not be using King County Metro this year, because we weren't able to work with them in terms of scheduling and flexibility, that was also taken out of the budget. And we've also, because Chartwells is not going to be, we don't believe Chartwells will be providing the same level of nutrition services this year. At the height of the spring feeding, we were producing 500 meals a day, which is significantly less than an average normal school day. And so most likely we will not be seeing the same level of cost for that program. And so we've reduced those expenditures in the budget as well. So with all the flexibility, all of the different considerations that we've put in, we're looking at an appropriation ask of $71.8 million. It is a large appropriation, yes, but that gives us significant flexibility to be able to meet demands as they arise. Do I believe that we'll need all of this capacity or flexibility? Most likely not. We haven't in the past, but it does give us that ability to be agile enough to respond. What that gives us at the end of 20-21 is a fund balance of 3.6 million, or about 5%, which is not within policy, but recognizing that we are in unprecedented times, it again allows us and gives us the recognition that we're looking for agility here, and we're looking for the ability to meet uncertain circumstances that arise. Any questions on the general fund? Yes.
Not so much a question, but a comment that in recognizing the fund balance and how that differs from the new policy standards at the end, the reason that we placed that in policy was so that we would be able to be agile and cover these costs in the case of a crisis or emergency. And so I'm glad that it's there.
Yeah, no, I have appreciated the board's support in putting together the fund balance policy as the benchmark and framework to help guide our planning. And with the recognition that that's why we asked for this policy, is so that when we come upon these unusual times, that we have this ability to respond appropriately. One of the things that I want to touch on briefly before we move on to the other funds, if we scroll down.
Can I jump in and ask a question?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you. I thought you were going to be on the downhill slide after dealing with all the McCleary stuff, and now there's this. So sorry. Recognize how challenging this is, and appreciate your conservative nature in making the budget, and hopefully we will end up better than we think, which we tend to do with your leadership. So thank you on that. We have, I don't know if this is the right place to ask this, but in talking about the transportation budget, we have been hearing concerns that if we have no ridership in the fall, are we going to have to pay that money back that is being allocated to us now for basically the first semester? Do you have any information on that?
We have mixed responses on that. We are continuing to push and try to get an answer on that. We're getting unclear messaging on it as well. So we have that same question, and we've heard Ty and I meet probably 3 times a week. What'd you hear today? Because he sometimes hears something different in his WASBO conversations or in his conversations with the finance department from OSPI, and I will hear something different in the superintendent's conversations. So we are on it, we're listening for it, we're following it closely, and as soon as we have clear guidance on that, we will be passing that on to the board as well.
Yeah. I mean, okay.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to.
In our WASDA call today, we were told that we're good until second semester because of the way the funding allocation works. But again, I've heard concerns. What is your team doing, and what can the board be doing to try and get answers to that?
So one of the things, I mean, this is a very complex question, a very complex situation. OSPI is putting their hands in their pockets and saying, this is the law. This is a legislative problem. We're just here to pass on the information and help run the funding. Not super helpful. The other thing that we're hearing from OSPI is a reminder that transportation dollars are restricted. It is to from transportation. So to school, from school transportation. So as much as we would like to use those dollars to help support the program in other ways, such as delivering packets or delivering meals, that may not meet the legislative intent of the dollars. And so there's some concern that if we were to do that, it would be problematic, would be a soft way of saying it. So OSPI's recommendation and recommendation from other districts and from WASBO is that what we really need to be doing is telling our story to the legislature. How does this funding problem impact us? If we have to give the money back in January or a little bit later in the fiscal year, that leaves us with no money to run our buses. That leaves us with nothing. If we can keep the money, can we use that money to support the core mission of the district, which is our children are the priority? Can we use that money to bring students to and from the buildings for small group activities? Can we use that money to transport packets? Can we use that money to deliver food? I mean, we would probably see a higher participation in the nutrition services realm if we were able to deliver meals to neighborhoods. So our greatest need is to be able to tell that story to the legislature and say, this is why we need the money. This is what impacting transportation does. And there's a significant concern of if we can't keep the money and if we're not able to use it, other districts around us are concerned about being able to retain their transportation staff and being able to have it up and running when they return. So there's a lot of moving parts in transportation right now. And as Superintendent Klosky says, when we hear more concrete information and even semi-concrete information, we'll be passing that on to the board and letting you know what we're facing.
And I had shared with the board in an update recently a letter that the superintendents in the PSESD sent to OSPI around this concern with, frankly, having to dismantle our transportation departments. And when we are able to transport again, being able, how do we put that back together? There's a huge concern in every single district in the region. I can certainly speak for King and Pierce County because I meet with them sometimes twice a week. And everyone is expressing a great concern of being able to retain our drivers so that when we are able to transport again, we still have a transportation department that is able to do that. So that is a huge concern. And the superintendents are writing letters, and I know that WASDA's had those conversations as well. So it is a legislative conversation as to how that funding mechanism is, but the big concern of if we have to dismantle our department, putting it back together will be a huge problem that we might not be able to accomplish in a timely manner. We have budget, yeah. But.
Thank you.
Director D'Souza, did you have a question?
How do we think about the January through June school year? What was your budget assumptions around that? Is it some maximum of we're open or online?
So the overarching guidance that when we prepare a budget every year, one of the things that we do is we talk with WASBO and OSPI. They provide supporting documents, they provide supporting tools and guides that we can use as aids in preparing the budget. And one of the overarching things that they said is, plan as you almost normally would. So the budget is designed to support a program that would see us in the buildings. My guess is we'll probably see reduced expenditures in the first half of the year, but probably as we start bringing people back into the buildings, we'll probably see that come up to a normal expenditure pattern. We'll probably see expenditures very similar to what we saw projected this year, maybe a little bit higher.
So the expectation is we won't cut into the fund balance further, or we don't know. I mean, I think over the long term we have to rebuild it, but
yeah, over the long term we're gonna have to rebuild it. And as we look at the 4-year forecast, when we're done with the guide, we'll touch on that. As we look forward, assumptions as in the outer years are not quite as conservative as they have been in the past, and so we do plan to rebuild the fund balance in the outer 4 years. So whatever we're planning to spend down now, we're going to work very hard in the outer 4 years to bring it up. One of the things that I want to, any other questions at this point? Okay, one of the things I wanted to touch on really briefly as we go to the next page in the general fund section should be enrollment. Our funding, the vast majority of our funding is driven by student enrollment. And we take our enrollment projections from two sources. One is our in-house projections that I perform using data such as average growth at grade level over a series of years, birth rates on the island, the rate of incoming kindergartners. Those are all inputs that go into projecting the 5-year enrollment forecast. The other source that we use is a demographer by the name of Les Kendrick. And the district has been using him for a significant amount of time, and he's very familiar. And we actually engaged Dr. Kendrick in December to do a mid-year, he does a 4-year projection plot, essentially, every 4 years. And we just had one 2 years ago, but we asked him to refresh that as part of the facility master plan process that we engaged at the beginning of the 1920 school year. And so the slide that we see on this page is Dr. Kendrick's projections for the next 4 years, 5 years, which match roughly with our own internal projections. Historically, we've always trended right around his mid-range projections, that dark blue line. over the last couple of years, we've started to dip below that mid-range and kind of average between the low and mid-range, which is the trend that we're looking at seeing as we move into the future. So one of the considerations that we have to consider right now is that anytime you start using averages, anytime you have a decline, the further out you get, that decline exaggerates. So right now we're projecting flat, slightly declining enrollment. As we move to the next page, these are our internal projections over the next several years. Dr. Kendrick uses head count for students, so individual children, for facility use purposes. We project full-time enrollment for funding purposes. So a student who may be half-time only counts as 0.5 within these projections. So again, consistent with Dr. Kendrick's numbers, we are projected to decline slightly over the next several years. When it comes to the 20-21 school year, we projected those numbers in November of last year. We made a couple adjustments in early February, March, as things started getting kind of scary. And as we've gone through the summer, we've been watching it as we do every summer. You know, it starts out on a monthly basis, then weekly, then several times a week, and then sometimes, like right now, a couple times a day. Right now, as of today, we are 3 students below projection, which is the tightest we have ever been to our projections. Usually we do trend slightly higher, somewhere in the 30 to 80 students above projection range. But the fact that even with all of the considerations that we have to factor in, parents who may want to keep their kindergartners home or in private placements, families who may withdraw, families who may go to private schools or homeschool. Even with all those things, we are still seeing numbers consistent with our projections, which means that our funding should be very consistent with our early revenue projections for state and state funding sources. And I think it also kudos to Superintendent Klosky and the learning services team and the principals and the teachers in the district as a whole, that even with all of the things that we're seeing right now, that our enrollment is consistent with projections, that we haven't lost students, that we're still seeing people want to participate in the district and their faith in the Learning Forward plan. So kudos to the learning services team. Any questions on enrollment? Brian, or Director Ginny.
Out of curiosity, I know that we're in the process for RSVP and all of that with enrollment. How far along in the process do you kind of feel we are with that?
You know, I'm not a superintendent.
I saw Fred lean in. I think Fred might have a little better knowledge of that. I know that we have many of our clerical support for our sites back in. They aren't 260-day employees, so they're back in and they're doing that summer cleanup work where those who have left are being exited out of the system, and those who have enrolled electronically are being put into the system as well. So we're in the heat of it now, but Dr. Vendel might have some more information than that.
I would say we are right in the middle of it. Positive signs are the numbers of families at the elementary who responded to our most recent request to gather information about their intentions regarding enrollment. We're really trying to look at, you know, if we can offer MI online, if we can offer read remote learning for the entire school year. And as of this morning, we had over 1,600 responses on that. And we've asked for 1 response for each student. So over 1,600 student responses already in there. I think that puts us probably within 150 maybe tie or so of having almost everyone. So we're getting great responses from the community. We really appreciate that. It helps us with our planning, preparing for the classes and getting set. And I know we're seeing similar trends on our other components. So really engaged community right now. Looking forward to coming back.
Thank you.
I have a question, Ty. So when we do the full enrollment, usually when do they count? What day that is full enrollment? And I see that you on your guide that if we do MI online, it will be a reduce. Let's say if we have a significant number of people who choose MI online, do you think it has any big budget implication?
So the official enrollment count for the year is the first school day in October. So it gives students and family time to settle down, get enrolled, be active, and participate. The funding difference between what's called the Alternative Learning Environment, ALE, which is what MI online would be funded at, and the typical prototypical model funding is probably about $800 per head, or for FTE. I mean, we're talking 10,000 to 9,000 ish a difference. So while it would be a slight drain on the system when we're talking potentially 30, 40 kids, it's not going to significantly impact the overall funding. And we've already worked on figuring out how many students it would take in MI Online to support a district teacher. So as we start looking at how many students are enrolled in MI Online, we can start looking at assigning staff to that program, which would wind up being a equivalent funding source.
Okay, that's
So
good to know.
Yeah, we've looked at that. Does that answer your question, Dr.
Yeah,
Dean?
definitely.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right.
You've been super thorough, and I had questions and you've answered them. So thank you.
Awesome. That's what I like to hear. All right, as we can scroll down, I believe this takes care of the general fund. Within the next few pages are just essentially how we split up the general fund into those programs and activities that I mentioned earlier. That's how we, OSPI and the state, track the money as we use it. That's the prescribed accounting treatment. So it allows us the ability to separate how much money are we spending on basic education, how much money are we spending on transportation, very quickly and cleanly. So within the guide to the budget, it outlines what those 6 cost centers are and how we use those programs. The Transportation Vehicle Fund, as I mentioned, this is solely for the purpose of buying buses. We have buses that are at the end of their depreciable life. We get reimbursed from the state for the depreciation of those buses, the wear and tear on the buses. And so as buses depreciate off the schedule, we no longer receive funding for them. So it's a way of inducing districts to continually have a modern fleet, an up-to-date and safe fleet. So we are looking at purchasing, I want to say, 6 buses this year.
No, Patrick's showing you 5.
It's showing 5? Okay. I can't see Patrick on my screen right now. So we're looking at 5 buses this year. A mix of small and large buses. And out of an abundance of caution, and because a lot of districts are also buying buses this year, and we had timing problems last year that required a budget extension, we budgeted amply for the purchase of these buses this year. So we should be well taken care of. That's it for the Transportation Vehicle Fund. Capital Projects Fund. As we're looking at next year's capital projects. There will probably be some final work that needs to be done at IMS for the roof, for the fields, as well as some final work on Merriway Pool. As we scroll down just a little bit more so we can see the full table. All right, thank you. We're also looking at replacing carpets and flooring at some of the buildings. We need to replace the hot water and boilers at 2 of our older elementaries. That's going to be about $1 million. We also have some facility planning work that's outstanding. So we need to finish the facility master plan. We've been working with Malum throughout the 1920 school year to engage the community in a facility master plan. We had the majority of the work accomplished before the pandemic hit. And we're going to continue to work with Malum to come up with essentially a condensed plan that we'll bring to the board that we'll be able to revive when we get closer to a need when the board and the district sees it. There's some other smaller items, restriping the parking lots, landscape maintenance. We're slowly but steadily working on some upgrades to the central office in terms of renovating workspaces and updating workspaces. Facility upgrades. We placed additional capacity within the facility upgrade in the event that we needed to make some modifications to the buildings as a response to the pandemic. We haven't seen that yet, but in the event that something does happen, we have capacity within the budget now to ensure that we'll be able to make those modifications quickly. And then the annual technology plan as approved by the levy. So it's a bit larger of an appropriation for the capital projects fund than we've had in the past. But again, this is why we have the fund balance to make sure that we're able to be agile and respond. So we're looking at revenues of 6.6 million, projected capacity of 12.59 million, which leaves us with an ending fund balance of 8.9 million. Any questions on the capital projects fund? All right. As we scroll down, next should be debt service. Debt service is pretty straightforward. We collect money for the bonds and we repay the bonds. Our debt payment is going to be accelerating in the next few years. We are on kind of an accelerated payment schedule. We believe it's a 15-year bond, so we're looking at 2029 as a full repayment. So over the next several years, we're going to start seeing the debt service amounts ramp up. We did have a general, several years ago, the notion was that the fund balance and the debt service would be used to smooth the tax collection rates to repay the bond, and we would slowly work that down as the rates increased. However, with the pandemic hitting, one of the things that we need to consider is, are we going to continue to be able to collect the full amount of the debt service levy every year? And so one of the things that I have started taking a look at is, what would it take to retain 70% of the debt next year's debt service within the fund balance of the debt service fund. So that's one of the things that we'll continue to be taking a look at as we move forward, and we'll be watching the October levy collections very closely as to what we'll be receiving. Any questions on the debt service fund? All right, let's go to ASB. All right, so we're looking at ending the year in ASB with about $893,000. We're looking at collections, assumed collections, and again, this is based on the notion that we will still be able to maintain some clubs, some activities remotely, and the hope that we will be able to have athletics further into the year. Athletic fee collections are not as much as in previous years, but we are still aiming to collect them in the hopes that we will be able to participate and those students will be able to have those experiences. So we're looking at revenue collections of 1.387 million. And again, the expenditures related to a normal school year in the hope that we can still provide those services are 2.17. So it's a steep appropriation for the ASB. Don't necessarily think that we're going to see that, but these are the budget plans that were placed together by the individual buildings as they plan their activities. So it is a steep reduction, but again, as we look at the outer years in the forecasts, hopefully normal years, we'll see more increased collections, which will help rebuild the fund balance. Any questions on ASB? All right. The final page in the guide is just a breakout of the buildings and their projected collections and their projected uses. What the different buildings believe that they're going to be collecting for their clubs and using for their clubs, as well as we break out the ASB in general for the different buildings and how they have the resources available to them. If we could close the guide and then go to the F195F. This is the 4-year forecast. Okay.
Just for the new board members, we know there's a code up there, F195F. That's the name of this document. That is a required document just in the past 2 years with OSPI.
Yeah, as part of the McCleary solution, the state wanted to start looking at what are the districts projecting their future to look like in terms of resources and revenues and uses. 4 years is a big ask for a district. There's a whole lot of unknowns that go into it in terms of enrollments, legislative activities, pandemics. Who knew? So as we look at the 4-year forecast, just quickly want to touch on the general fund really quick. If we could scroll down. The projected ending fund, I believe it's going to be on 2 pages. If we go down 2 pages and get to the ending fund balances right there. As we mentioned, we're looking at drawing down based on the capacity. We'll draw down the fund balance in the 20-21 school year. But as we look at the potential increases in revenue and much tighter expenditure controls in the outer years, as well as better budgeting in terms of what is that those outer years look like, we'll be able to rebuild the fund balance and get us back into the range of policy. So any questions on the other funds are here as well. But for expediency's sake, any questions on the 4-year forecast? All right. So as Superintendent Kloski said, this is the first reading. This is the guide to the budget. We'll, when we come back in 2 weeks, we'll have the official budget document for the budget hearing and as well as the guide and all the supporting exhibits for the big budget book. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thank you for all that. That is a big lift and we appreciate it. It is 8 o'clock on the nose. I'm proposing a 5 or 10 minute bio break. 5. 5-minute bio break, 8:05. Thank you. Just waiting on Maggie Ty, and we will get started again. And there she is. All right, we are coming back in, and we are at 2D, Board Policy 1008P, the 2021 Board Calendar, first reading.
So just to go through this a little bit, it's built on really the premise as your previous calendars. When you take a look at this document, so if Andreeves wants to open it up, you can see that it certainly is built on the twice a month for regular meetings. It does also include linkages and site visits. We did keep those in. The board president and vice president and I talked about that and thought, well, perhaps we can come up with a creative alternative, but we did leave those dates in there. And it's a good thing this is a draft, because there's a place where it says Board Policy 2020. We do keep finding those, so we will fix that. But as you can see on the far left-hand corner, it outlines per your policy all of the 1000 series and how those are monitored throughout the year, the operational expectations, Board Policy 1800, how those are monitored throughout the year, and then of course the fundamentals, which is Board Policy 001, and how they're monitored throughout the year, linkage, board development, which is part of a policy as well, and then any additional topics that are annual things that we include in our meetings. You can see in September, always looking forward to our swearing in of our new student rep, because that they come to our meetings only when school is in session. And so other activities that occur throughout the year, we've tried to fit in the space for that as well. And then just other ongoing events that have occurred on an annual and regular basis, so that those dates are available for people to see. This is something we always have scheduled. Will all of those occur as they have in the past is unknown at this time, but we will work to have an alternative in some format to support families and of course the board as well. So an example being our new family welcome that has been such a great success in the past maybe 5 or 6 years. We'll figure out a way. It will look different, but we still want to be able to continue with many of the traditions that we have had happen throughout the years. So 1008, first reading. If you approve it, we'll make some slight edits to errors such as Board 2020, and then we can bring it on consent agenda for next meeting.
Questions or comments?
Are we still authorized for online board meetings?
Yes, we currently are. So we just keep watching that date. I've heard of entities, in fact, the Mercer Island City Council has anticipated that their meetings will be in a virtual setting through the rest of this calendar year, so through December. I anticipate that it's going to continue, particularly when you look at the phases and where things are sitting. So right now we are good through September. I don't remember the exact date, but we are good through September, and we'll keep you updated on that. The real big piece on the change to it is that physical location that we have to have. But I think one of the things people have discovered is that this virtual setting actually seems to allow for more participation. So that piece is there as well.
The other interesting question would be is, do we allow public input online? And do we want to as a board? Is the technological complexity surmountable, and then is that valuable to the board?
I'm writing that down because I think we're due to have that conversation. I know that there are other districts who talked about doing town hall meetings and having that public input on Zoom calls with regard, I mean, they were talking about with reopening plan, but I bet we can brainstorm, and as this is going on longer than any of us intended, perhaps we can put that on the next agenda and have a fuller discussion about it. Brian?
I think it'd be great to have a discussion about that. And we do have some best practices in some of our neighboring school districts that are managing to do that. It's really about setting up really specific parameters for how we do that in timing and buffers to ensure that everything is appropriate, but it is doable.
Yes, thank you, David. Any other questions or comments? I have a few. So just in terms of some of the planning. So we, as you all know, we're still trying to work through our fundamentals. And we've had some big time barriers. And then we've also have some ideas that we might want to be exploring before we really work on concluding or work on the fundamentals. So a couple of different things. Number one, looking at our schedule the way that we have it, I think it's good that we don't, that we're looking at fundamental 1 and 2 in October, but then we don't look at any of the other fundamentals until February. So at this point, you know, my personal goal is to really have a good idea, like through the end of the year. I think this gives us some cushion to be able to really get it to where we want it to get to and not have to rush through just so we know what we're monitoring. In agenda planning, Maggie and I talked about if we wanted to change our monitoring schedule this year based on all of the other heavy lifts that we're asking our superintendent to do, including creating an entirely new educational system. So, and while still doing our job. And so the question is, do we want to be reducing or changing the monitoring to level 1 as opposed to having the level 2, so that the time can really be spent on red learning, current issues that need to be addressed rather than collecting data. And so we're still doing our job with monitoring, and yet it might not be as time consuming a lift for our leadership team. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know that we need to make that decision now, and this is first reading, so that's just to ponder. But in looking at the calendar again, the fact that we don't get to Fundamental 3 until February, I don't know that we need to make that decision yet, and we can always come back and modify this calendar if we think it's appropriate. So that's kind of where my head is right now. The other thing, and this came up just yesterday, as you all know, the Superintendent Klosky, Assistant Superintendent Rundle, and our Director of Special Services, Dr. Booby is, and then a couple more of us, I know I'm trying to come up with these names, have been working on the Inclusive Practices Grant from through WASA. And we have had the absolute privilege of being facilitated by Katie Novak, who is a leader in the field of UDL, Universal Design for Learning. And after her presentation, we were hoping this would all be, you know, face-to-face, but it's converted to, she's in Massachusetts, and it's converted to online learning. But she, in doing our learning yesterday, I realized that I thought that as we move towards adopting Universal Design for Learning, which is a 4 to 7 year process, that it's something that we should probably take a look at before we land on our fundamentals. I just think it might be a really good foundation for us, because I think as we were going through yesterday, our meeting yesterday, it just kept hitting different points for me of where we currently are in our fundamental planning process. So I know we've been looking for ways to do some board learning, and we will be seeking out, seeing if we can bring Katie Novak to do a high level, probably fairly short, meaning like an hour or two, talk on universal design for learning, so we can get the board up to speed about what this project is focused on, so that we can decide. I think it might just help us really with putting where we are with the fundamentals on a really solid path of where we're taking our district after the hard work of the mission, values, and vision that we did last year. So that's all things that with agenda planning and planning for board learning we can work on. And again, I just kind of wanted to throw out there what I was thinking as I didn't want to go through this first reading without addressing the fundamentals and our responsibility in terms of making sure that we are getting the fundamentals set in the way that we want them to be set. We had hoped to have been done by now, but we've had other more time pressing things that have needed to take place. So if anyone has any comments on that now, it is welcome. Otherwise, I just wanted to throw that out there for thinking before we get to the second reading for next time.
Just a thought. So when you brought up the idea of monitoring and make it a level 1. So when we're doing the monitoring, it is during really COVID time, online time, which is kind of like how we do things before. It's going to be slightly different than years past. So as we're building the system, what kind of new metrics are we embedded in there to be able to capture information seamlessly and in real time, so that you don't have to go back and figure it out. A lot of time people don't think about the assessment until the end. And we've been so used to certain kind of assessment methods because we've been in school, but I wonder if our assessment strategy is going to be very different when we're online.
So the difference between fundamental 1 and fundamental 2, level 1 and level 2 is really the qualitative and the quantitative. So level 1 is still all the quantitative, I'm saying that right? The quantitative data, so all the numbers and monitoring and all the things that you just talked about. The qualitative is really a description of specific things that are happening at different schools, the analysis of what's happening, and just basically more when our leadership teams from the buildings come, when our principals come and present to us different things that are happening at the buildings. And the thought isn't that it isn't going to be happening this year. The thought is that our learning services only has a certain amount of bandwidth. And do we want them working to create the online programs, or do we want them spending their time reporting to us what they're doing to the degree that a level 2 monitoring requires? And it certainly doesn't mean that they can't bring things to us and give us examples of what's happening. It's just in terms of what are we asking our learning services team to be presenting to us as part of this monitoring, and only for this year because of the extra demands on learning services because of all the changes. So does that address what you were going for?
Yeah, no, so I guess we'll talk more about maybe the second reading, but it's just for us to think about how do we not, we're not, I don't want to come across as a board that we're reducing quality somehow. We're still monitoring and we're getting feedback, but we're recognizing it might look different during this time. And whether that is level 1, level 2, right? We can decide on that. But I think sometimes when we just put, sometimes when we say that we're just doing something because of even though we totally recognize of the bandwidth, then I feel when we say that, somehow I feel like we're not doing our duty as a board, to maintain the standards. So even though I totally recognize that everybody's working 3 times as hard, right? But, when we talk about this, how do we make sure that we're just getting the feedback, right, that we need to effectively monitor how things are going this year, and whether that fits in level 1, level 2, we can talk about it. So just kind of a little bit of clarification on that.
Maggie Tai?
Yeah, I'm actually thinking that even if we do decide as a group that we only need level 1 monitoring, that level 1 monitoring may not have the same exact form as it has in the past, because things are going to be so different this year in terms of what activities the schools are doing, in terms of what the classes are like, et cetera. So there may actually be additional work involved in just even being able to do the level 1 monitoring. And so I'm expecting that we'll be hearing about the different programs that they're going to be doing, the kind of like community building programs and things like that. So I'm kind of thinking of it as maybe what we really need is like level 1 enhanced, kind of like level 1, but we'd really like to be updated on what you're doing, and acknowledging that even level 1 may be different this year just because of the unusual circumstances.
Yeah, I think exactly, McIntyre.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's either level 0.8 or level 1.2, but to bring the flavor both to the board as well as to parents watching, what has changed in this pandemic time. And I think, in fact, thinking about it, you may want to reduce the numerical data around this, because it's just so different. People don't know how to rate it on this case, and enhance the qualitative data, which might be the stories, the antidotes of what's happening for each one of these. And that might be more relevant in an agile environment that we're having now.
Anyone else?
So,
I think they're great suggestions. And we're not deciding anything today. We're just talking about it. Any other, I think I hit the things that I wanted to hit. I just wanted to comment that, this year we did the first time the PTA community linkage, and I really like that. And I'm happy to see it again. So that was one of my highlights. Okay, so that is a first reading. We're not going to take any action. Do we want to put it on the consent agenda, or do we want to have another discussion based on the things that we just talked about? Do we want to put it on for second reading? I don't know that it actually changes the agenda, the annual board agenda at this point, but just looking for some opinions here. Second reading or consent agenda?
consent agenda sounds fine for me. We've given feedback at this point on flexibility to the superintendent.
Okay. All right, anyone opposed to going to the consent agenda? Just show me. No one seems opposed. All right, so we'll please put this on the consent agenda for the next meeting. Thank you. Okay, sorry, have to get back to my agenda. Okay, we are at 2E, Board Policy 1800 OE6. Budgeting, financial planning, city district interlocal agreement, school counselors, first reading.
So this does sit in that budget and financial planning because there is a contribution that has not changed in this new interlocal, but there are some changes. And because Dr. Rundle is the one who works directly with YFS and working through some of the assignments, he has the information on really what are the parts that have changed on this. We all know that the city has had to make adjustments based on economic situation because of the pandemic. So he is going to highlight for you what are the differences from this year to last year. And this always comes forward at this time of year as well. So.
Great, thank you. This is the work really this year, you know, a lot of work went into this with Derek Franklin, who is leading YFS along with Chief Holmes. Now that Cindy Goodwin has departed, the attorney from the city, our superintendent, the city manager, and certainly Kendall, who was helping behind the scenes with a lot of language. But by and large, I am pleased to report that the interlocal, yes, it has some modifications, but it's largely intact and unchanged. The fundamentals behind it are still all about students, all about providing services in our schools to our students with our partners with the city. And I know that you as a board and boards before you have oftentimes taken time to thank the city. And I know we continue to do that in our linkages, but you know, I know we're grateful for their continued support, especially amidst the budget challenges that the city has had. This has continued to be a priority. With that, just a couple of changes. In section 3 this year, it's 3.2. There was a slight reduction. If you recall, last spring, they had to do some layoffs, and that included 2 of our counselors at the elementary, and it also reduced the counselors down to half-time. And that was essentially from May through the end of the school year. Fortunately, through their foundation, through YFS, as well as commitments through the city, they've been able to restore all 7 positions for the upcoming school year. However, there is a slight reduction that they will be 32 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week. So there was some reduction there. However, all the schools will have a counselor there supporting students. In section 3.5, the only slight change was the addition of the ability to provide services via virtual platforms, given how we're starting the school year. And then down in section 5, under service level changes, there's some language in here, just remembering that our fiscal year is September 1st through August 31st. However, theirs is on the calendar year, January 1st through December 31st. Because of that, the funding is definitely in place through the end of their current budget cycle. So on December 31st, you know, if there aren't additional funds or they're not able to drive funds towards this, there could be a change mid-year. In talking to Derek, he doesn't believe that that's going to be a problem. The foundation they have has been strong about this, but it's always a uncertainty for them, so they wanted that language in there. Outside of that, like I said, we will still have the 2 high school counselors. We'll have the 1 middle school counselor, plus the half-time mental health counselor who's an intern, and then each of the elementary schools will have their counselors. So other than that, it's largely unchanged from previous years, and we'll continue to partner with them. With that, I can take any questions.
Is there a notification requirement if the service level changes?
There is. There's a 30, I believe it's 30 calendar days by either party on that inside, and that's been a standing item.
That sounds great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just want to make a comment that we all know that this is our community's one of our highest priorities. And as we've all hit some financial challenges. It's really been great to see the community come together and fight for something that we know supports our students in such a great way. So this is something that makes me very proud to be this community. So thank you to everyone who really stepped up, put their time in, their commitment in, and followed this through to make sure that we are and can continue to provide the necessary services to our students and families.
So this is a first reading, but if the board so deems, we could have it on consent agenda for the 27th. As I said earlier, the interlocal will then also be approved by the city, I believe, at their first meeting in September.
Unless I hear something, we will put it on the consent agenda for the next meeting. Okay, thank you. Item 2F was, yes.
Before we leave that item, I would like to make a motion to the board that we authorize the president or her designee to pen a letter of thanks to the City Council, Youth and Family Services, and our community partners on behalf of the board for this service, this restoration of service.
I second that.
I certainly am not opposed to that. Is this can we make a motion, can there a motion be made when this is on for discussion only? Lots of people have frozen. Okay.
It's not for the actual
Okay.
action item. It's more of a thank you, and it does fall within your policy of the president can speak for the board when so deemed by the rest of the board. So I'm going to say it falls within that area.
That works for me. So any thoughts on that?
That seems fine.
Anyone want to pen that? Director Tucker is volunteering. Is there anyone that wants to work with her? Do you want a partner?
No, I'm okay.
Okay.
I can support you, Maggie Ty, if you need it.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. I was going to say I won't volunteer someone if you're okay with it, but thank you, Director Din. So, all right. So it's a motion. It seems I'll just take a vote by hand or sign. So all in favor indicate by showing me that you are saying aye, and that is 5-0. So that motion passes. Thank you, Director Janini Upton, for that. Okay, now we'll move on to our consent agenda. So I'm looking for a motion.
I move that we adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? I'm going to do a roll call vote on this. It's a little bit more official. So please indicate your vote when I call on you. My vote is yes or approve. Director Tucker? Yeah,
Yes.
it's a yes vote. And is Director Janini Upton is yes. Director D'Souza?
Yes.
Yes.
And Director Din?
Yes.
All right, so the consent agenda is approved by a vote of 5-0. We are at 4A, Superintendent's Report.
Just a quick report to the board. We did attempt to use the board docs to have you sign documents. We found that, I know that everybody's used this before. I was in it at 5 a.m. this morning for some personal documents that I was working on. It becomes really cumbersome when you get more than 2 people, the amount of emails and the shuffling back and forth. So we do have a stack of documents for you to sign, which will now include a resolution. And so what I'm going to ask each of you is if you could set up an appointment with me. I'm going to look at Director Janini up, and I'm here anytime you 7 days a week, except for Sunday nights or something like that. But if you could set up an appointment with me, we'll have the documents for you to sign. It includes things like that we're on the consent agenda tonight, the resolution, several other pieces. And then we've got some mail pieces and stuff for you to have as well. So if you would just send me a time that would work for you as an appointment so we could meet one-on-one. We'll practice social distancing and wear our masks and get documents signed officially. So thank you for that.
And if anyone is concerned about that manner, please just contact Superintendent Klosky as well and make other arrangements. Board announcements, inquiries, and reports. Legislative report, Director Janini Upton. And before he goes, legislative rep is a big lift, and it's often not seen as one because it's less public. And I just want to thank Director Janini Upton for jumping in with both feet, making it. He has participated in WASDA and then also in the legislative process as a director area to legislative representative that he's been voted for by our entire director to region board directors. And he has made it so that Mercer Island School District is an active part of WASDA, especially the East Side directors, and with his leadership WASDA participation and lots of other things. So thank you for that. It's above and beyond, and these legislative priorities that we're going to be discussing really do impact our students' lives and our community's lives and our staff's lives. So it's important, and thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I love doing the work. So I'm a policy wonk, so I'm happy. And I was going to start singing, it's the most wonderful time of the year because General Assembly is coming. So this is where we begin the process from grassroots on up to the top of our organization to set our legislative platform for the next legislative session in 2021. To that end, there's 6 things that are kind of necessary to be dealt with in no particular order. It's important that we all familiarize ourselves with the 2020 General Assembly Handbook. This is the first time that WASDA will ever be doing a General Assembly. It combines 2 previous events that would have happened over a span of months into one event. And this will set not only the guiding mission and continue to enhance the guiding mission of WASDA as an organization, but also establish all of its legislative activities and its strategic advocacy. The General Assembly Handbook is now available. It has been produced. There'll be a few changes that will probably happen before Assembly, but you can get to that by going to wasda.org/GA is all you need, and the information is in there. So it's important that everyone gets an understanding of everything that's in there. And the reason I say everything, and I'm happy to work with anyone to provide guidance on how to break it down. It's not as difficult as it looks, but the first time you approach the handbook, it's a lot to take on. Last year, when priorities were set by WASDA, a specific priority rose up to the top 5. And when I presented that to our board at the time, there were some board members who were surprised by one of them and said, well, I don't necessarily support that. And my response was, I didn't know that as your delegate. So it's not only important to know what you support and prioritize, but also what you do not, or what we as a board do not prioritize, so that our delegate can speak to that at Assembly. It's really important. The second thing is to, or I guess that covers the second thing. The third is to submit proposed amendments. This year's General Assembly is going to be entirely online. And so there is a specific window, a week of the 21st to the 28th, where districts can provide in advance any amendments that we would like to make to legislative positions. No one will be able to provide amendments from the floor at the time of Assembly. So it's important that we know ahead of time as a board if there are any amendments we would like to submit. One of the most important things is selecting our school district's 15 priorities. So out of the suite of legislative positions, those are returning positions, new positions, amended positions, and standing positions, what are our 15 most important for Mercer Island School District? Plus a couple extras just in case something changes. And those will be voted on at the end of the assembly. And those will be broken down. We'll get results by director area, which is essentially King County, as to what the top priorities are for King County, as well as the state. And those are what will go into the legislative conference that will happen ahead of our Day on the Hill in January or February. This year, we have an opportunity to plan for our attendance in that. Because it is an all virtual event this year, it's unique in that there is no charge for the event. So for the first time, the district can afford to send all 5 of us to General Assembly. And we can do that virtually together in the same space if we feel it's comfortable to do that while socially distancing and wearing masks, or we can join together virtually via Zoom while the delegate is casting the vote. So it's important to think about attendance and how you'd like to participate. It's really fantastic to be sitting together and discussing these amendments as the floor and really fine-tuning how we feel as a governing body. We just need to establish ahead of time how many of us are there. If there's a quorum, we just have to provide appropriate notice. And then the last piece is to set a designee for the board's voting credential. So each board, 295 boards across the state of Washington, each board receives 1 credential. Typically, you choose a delegate. Usually that's your legislative representative that heads the event and votes on behalf of the board. But the credential can be shared. It can only be used by 1 person at a time per position. But if somebody needs to step away, you can log in and use the credential. Another board member can do it. It can only be a board member that uses that credential. But we can assign different ones of us to speak to certain things. If we feel that somebody has a significant story or something, it's a unique opportunity. So the board needs to decide whether they want to assign the credential to an individual delegate or whether we would like to share it this year, which would be interesting. So with all of those things in mind, and because there's a lot to go through, I'm proposing that we put on our schedule a study session. I'm thinking around 2 hours if we're really focused, where we can each bring our priorities in that we choose. How we've done this in the past couple of years is that each representative, each board director presents their top 15 priorities in no particular order. Those are compiled to put in. We take input from the superintendent as well, our student representatives, and other folks to help inform that in a weighted manner. And then we filter into what kind of files into those top 15. And then we kind of move forward with that. So I would like to take the 2 hours to answer any questions about the handbook, the process, establish our top 15, and prepare any amendments that we want to submit ahead of time, if that works for all of you. And there are also some school districts that hit their legislative representative over the head with a bottle of champagne as a christening and send them forth to speak on behalf of the district. So it's up to the board how involved you want to be and how much you want your voice heard. Yeah, Maggie Ty.
Brian, when do you need us to have this done by, based on your understanding of the calendar and when we need to submit things?
If there's hope to amendment, if there's a chance that people will want to submit amendments, and it's not required, we'll need to do it before the 21st of August or within that week, because they can be submitted up until 5 p.m. on the 28th. Oh, and as far as timing, we have 2 regular board meetings on the 27th and the 10th of September between now and the event. And then we do have a board meeting on the 24th, which is General Assembly Eve. And so there is one final board meeting, a potential 3rd meeting for any last minute changes in those priorities. any thoughts? Is everyone comfortable with putting together a study session for a couple of hours to dive in? And yeah, if that's all right, President Lurie?
I am not opposed to it at all. And it would just need to be, oh, we want input. So my proposal is, well, I'll defer to Superintendent Klosky. I'm just trying to be aware of their bandwidth right now between now and school starting. So I think it's something the 5 of us could meet and discuss prior to our August 27th meeting, and then get input from Superintendent Klosky at that time. Does that make sense? Unless Superintendent Klosky are dying to participate in the, I think she'll defer to us to to do that. Does that sound reasonable? Why don't, so it's August 13th, why don't we, well, actually, Director Janini Upton, would you mind sending out to the board for scheduling purposes some dates and times of study sessions between now and the 27th? Actually, you said the 24th.
Before the 28th.
Before the 28th.
5 p.m. on the 28th is the deadline for any amendments.
Okay.
Other than the amendment deadline, you can move even.
Right. I think it would be good just to commit to do it in the next 2 weeks. Tam?
To facilitate the process, could we send out like a survey of all the priorities so we can take votes on it and kind of narrow it down instead of just coming in there and looking at everything? It might help us to kind of see where we're all at, what our top 15s are, to kind of do that pre-work before we get to the meeting.
Is there any problem with submitting something like that ahead of time? Looking to Erin or
Is
Donna.
there, I'm thinking that maybe we could do something like a doodle poll where we can't see the results, where the other people can't see, you know, so everyone can't see everyone's group, so it's not a meeting.
Right, exactly. So it would have to be in a situation where you're not actually, sorry, I've got background noise here, where you're not communicating with each other, so the responses are collected and then your communication can occur when you actually meet.
We just do a Google survey of all that, then we just click it and then you get it.
Yeah, if we collected it and provided to you at the meeting, that would be fine.
So is there still a desire to have a study session and discuss them? Or, because I remember in the past, have we actually discussed them, or have we just kind of done a tally individually?
It's just kind of done a tally individually. I'm taking into account that we have 2 new board members here who've not been through, subjected to the handbook yet. and the suite of possibilities. It's a very large collection of potential choices.
Okay, so do we want to do, I'm just thinking setting up a Google poll or doc is going to be a lot of work. Honestly, I think it's a great way of doing it. I just think the setup is, I'm probably the least technically savvy. So someone tell me.
How many questions are there? How many priorities are there?
There's over 80 priorities.
Okay. So
maybe even more, and 20 something brand new ones this year. Yeah.
So we typically come in with, do the work on our own, and come in with kind of a list of our, our own personal top 15 or top 20. Well, typically 15. And then we just kind of do a tally to see where it's falling of how many. So certainly open to doing it other ways.
So Brian, if you give it to me, I can create a survey, and then you guys can just click onto it, and whoever, then it shows us who selects, which number. It just gives us something to start with instead of just going in there. That's the first time. But if there's a list, then I can easily create one.
The list would be in the handbook. The handbook breaks down all of our legislative priorities. And then there are the 4 categories. We could also do, if everyone wants to read through the handbook ahead of time and spot if there are any specific amendments that you think you'd want to make. The language is pretty easy. We're not amending the arguments for or the titles. It's usually a paragraph. Typically it says WASDA will initiate or support X, Y, and Z, and it falls into one of 5 different categories. And so the amendment would be in that specific thing. But all of the new and returning, standing, and all of those pieces will be in the handbook.
Okay. And then so maybe you guys want to identify how, do you want to identify as your top 15 and you just click your top 15? Or do you want to have a Likert scale of, you know, how much you support something from 1 to 5?
My brain cannot make those comparisons for 80 different topics. I would just like to be able to pick my top 15, or we could pick more than 15. Like I'd like to be able to pick my top 20 and then we could see where those overlap and then pick our group's top 15. Does that make sense? So as long as if you're willing to set it up, that's great. As long as you set it up so we can't see each other's answers until.
Yeah, when you fill it out, it just goes to and then whoever downloads the Excel form, we will see it.
That would be great. Is that okay with everybody?
It's just a number and a title. And there are 80 of them, right? That's basically it. And we choose from the 80. We choose 15 from the 80.
Mm-hmm.
There may be more than that, but yeah.
And then are we getting together after that in a study session, or are we then going to take that information and meet up and
start with that information so it's a little bit more narrow conversation?
Yeah, and then in a study session, we would be able to find out which are the overlaps. Some are similar titles, relatively the same thing. And then we might want to do a prioritization to get the top 5 or top 10.
Mm-hmm. And you can do a Likert scale then.
I think this all sounds great. I guess what I'm getting at is, are we setting a study session between now and August 27th?
We are, yes.
Okay. Does anyone have a proposed day and time?
In terms of consistency, any Tuesday or Thursday seems to be reasonable.
25th?
Or we just...
Did you say the 25th?
Yeah, Tuesday, because on the Thursday we have a meeting.
What about the 20th? What about
I can't do the 20th. We have
I can't do the 18th evening.
I'm fairly open. There's one other thing I need to mention in relation to, while you're thinking about that. On the 18th, 19th, and 20th are the 3 remaining caucus meetings, which anyone is able to join, and the more the merrier. Again, if there's more than 2 of us, we need to notice it. But the 3 remaining caucus meetings are for equity and access, large schools, and the Federal Relations Network. These caucus meetings are to go over the handbook, to go over pertinent information, but also to gain feedback from these specific groups of how you might set your priorities. This is the room where these specific groups together, so equity and access, will talk about all the priorities through that lens, and we'll kind of establish some priorities to inform decisions as to what we might want to move to the top of the agenda as a caucus. Director Area 2 caucus met last week, and it was pretty high level, but I don't know if you want to take that into account if you'd like to talk to those through those caucus meetings on the 18th, 19th, and 20th You could do all or one or none, or if you'd like to meet before. Each of those are 5:30 to 7 p.m. on the 18th, the 19th, and the 20th.
I'm just going to be, I don't know that I have the time to do a study session between now and the 28th. I'm just going to be perfectly blunt. I've got a couple days I'm unavailable, and we have meetings, several meetings between now and then, board meetings, as well as my job. So I'm a little bit worried. If someone wants to throw out a time and we can make it happen, that's great. But I'm kind of hearing crickets.
I mean, your schedule is the, wait, am I muted?
You're not muted.
Okay, sorry. Your schedule is probably the most limited of all of us in terms of this time of year and what's going on. Is there a date that would work for you that's not a Tuesday or a Thursday? And then we could all see if we could make it.
Or if you're busy, Deborah, can we just look at last year's priorities? Has anything major changed, and can we just support them unless we have major issues with it? Or do we have to start all over?
There are new priorities coming in this year. Some will deal specifically with professional development for remote learning, which is actually a legislative position that I penned, but with another representative. But yeah, there's a handful of new ones that you'll want to consider this year that are specifically dealing with funding and COVID-related issues that may be really pertinent going into the January legislative session. And if we want to just set aside time at the board meeting as well to very quickly tabulate those things and check off, you can do that as well. Like, I love this stuff, and so I will wade out into the waters on this like nobody's business. This is a holiday for me. I know that that's not always the case for everyone, or that you don't have the bandwidth as well. I just want to make sure that the board has the opportunity for their priorities to be heard, and that we're representing our unique voices.
I have a question. Is this something where maybe we could all answer the poll, and you, Brian, could use that to set our priorities? And then if there's like one other board member that is really interested in getting involved in this, maybe the two of you could form a subcommittee to work on this, because I also feel stretched very thin right now. And I know we have additional meetings coming up, so.
That works.
That would,
it's up to the board. What is your appetite as a board for this?
I think that sounds like a good plan.
Tam, are you interested in doing that, since you've already offered
things to do? I mean, it's so big, and you can spend tons of time on this. So really the best way is just to look at last year, what have selected been the priorities, look at the new ones, and then see if there's anything that is so pressing that you would substitute one of the last year's one. That would be my go-to for this work. But I don't think any of us have the bandwidth to really process through all this during this time. And yeah, so I trust what the board last year has put. I don't think that, and then just look at the new ones. Do you want to start from that? Because there's 3 of you there from last year. So we can start with whatever the 15 and then just add, then it's kind of makes it a bit more narrow.
I mean, I've never seen these before, so I really want to look at the whole list and kind of myself come up with my own list of priorities, and maybe it doesn't match up at all with last year's. I think at this point it sounds like we should really like put Brian in a little boat and like send him out to sea to represent all of us here, and just to do that information gathering first to give you a little bit of sense of kind of where the board as a whole is, and then you can report back to us, Brian, during your like legislative reports, which is already part of the meeting. So I'm fine with that if everyone else is fine with that.
I'm fine with that too.
So do we want to make a commitment to have completed our own list by the August 27th meeting?
Oh yeah, once I do the list, it should be super easy unless you're like really researching, you know, what it means, but it should be just like click, 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 click. And so
I feel like we should do it before that though, because if he needs to get more guidance from us as a board, we don't want to push him right up against the deadline.
The only deadline for August is if there's any amendments that the board would like to propose. Other than that, we've got another regular meeting on the 10th of September. Where we can check in on that. Because we have until September 25th. The amendment window is the only thing. And the board has not, while I've been here, submitted an amendment. So.
Okay, that's helpful to know.
So I am now proposing that we, I don't have the next meeting's agendas in front of me to know how cumbersome they might be. So I would like to give us a little bit more time. So if we could just commit to doing it by the September 10th meeting. And then that will give us that meeting and then a following one if there's any follow-up after that. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah.
And then Tam, you can get that poll up, you know, within the next whatever week or so, and then.
That sounds good.
We good to go?
Yep. And then Director Battersby, correct me if I'm wrong, please. In the interim, as you crack open the handbook and say, holy cow, what is this? As you have questions, I'm always available to answer those questions. We don't have to discuss prioritization or anything like that. But in how to break down and the handbook in theater, we call them French scenes so that it's digestible and exactly what all the acronyms and everything mean. Please reach out and I'm happy to walk you through.
Okay. Yeah.
As long as you don't meet as a quorum, you're good.
Okay.
So then with that aside, we kind of have a plan for that. The only other things that I have on the legislative report is a really fantastic meeting with King County districts last Friday as part of the East Side group, invited other boards from across King County to have a discussion on our advocacy work. And we had 11 of the 20 districts available for that. It was really fantastic. While we've been really focused on Department of Health guidelines and the tree that came out and asking for those things, advocating, the position that really came up, the new thing of concern across King County really was childcare, as well as access to testing and quick turnaround for testing. So however that informs you, there really is a recognition for a need for childcare during this and how we can work with community groups to do that. So I wanted to share that out to you. And then today I had the privilege of sitting in on Superintendent Koloski's meeting with area districts in the 9th Congressional District and Congressman Adam Smith. So I don't want to steal your thunder, Superintendent Koloski. Did an amazing job. And from that, I've already fired off thank you notes to the congressman and our connection, Marvin Ang. And the big issues that seemed to come up from the key districts were centered in nutrition and the need for a waiver from the USDA in order to continue meals, reaching out to the congressman and to our senators, each of us individually, to advocate for the USDA, to put pressure on the USDA to provide those waivers is going to be really impactful, even here on Mercer Island, which would surprise a lot of people. Director Bergstrom shared that earlier of the 500 meals a day on average were served. So that's huge. The second thing is applying pressure towards CARES 2.0 and that funding that we need at the local and state level. And again, childcare was a major point of discussion today. So I just wanted to share that out. And it was really Marvin Ang, who's a Renton representative for Congressman Smith's office, met with us for the first time last year in our linkage session with representatives, which was a surprise. I was able to maintain connection with him. He connected me with the Congressman's office when I was in Washington, D.C. in February, and we've maintained that relationship. So we're getting a lot more correspondence from the Congressman, which is new and unusual and exciting. So props to Marvin for keeping us in the loop. And now I'm going to start working on our senators at the national level. But so there's my legislative report.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, I still have my microphone on. So we are to board reports. Anyone want to volunteer to go first? Oops, wait, shoot. I'm clicking on things I shouldn't be clicking on. Okay, now I can see everyone. Anyone have anything they want to report? No, no, no. I just want to make sure everyone saw the email I sent yesterday about the Katie Novak presentation that is open to everyone. It's definitely teacher directed, I mean teacher oriented, but she's just such a phenomenal speaker and so tremendously engaging. There aren't a ton of people that can keep my attention for a couple of hours, and she is one of them. I could list them on one hand. That's about me, not about anyone else. But anyway, so I don't know if it's full yet, but
it's recorded also in case you can't see it. So.
Yes, it is. She is recording it, and yeah. So, and then we're also, like I said, hopefully going to get her to come to us directly. So I just, unless anyone has anything else to say, I just want to this has been, it's only August 13th. It's been a really busy summer. So I just want to express gratitude to everyone for their hard work and dedication and time commitments. It is above and beyond what anyone intended for any of this to be, for all of us professionals and all of us volunteers. It's a crazy, crazy time, but we appreciate all of you. On that note, any motions to adjourn? Wait, Donna's gonna say I forgot something. No, I didn't forget anything. Okay.
I move we adjourn.
Seconded.
Second.
Okay, I'll do a hand or thumbs up vote for this one. All in favor indicate by some way. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned. It's 9:09 by a vote of 5-0. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.